Jeez. This is not a good look for me at all. Oh my God. Oh, I'm gonna have to see my I'm gonna have to see my makeup people. It always is funny when you go to do makeup for television and they put the thing around your shirt to protect your shirt, and they slather you with orange stuff to make you look like you're not dead on camera. Um, okay, so where the heck was I? Yes, so you need to be able to look at the rules, and the rules are, I let me put it this way. I hope it's not a bloody website, but often it is. But you look at a manual and you look at a PDF and you're like, what am I supposed to do in case of this? Well, war policy, you're like, where the heck is this going, Tim? I hear the pain. War policy is made by a number of competing forces, not just by the military, but also by civilians in government, some of whom may once have been military. Now, remember that I was talking about the military-industrial complex. This is where this comes into play. Let me just tilt this down a little bit. Oh, okay, that's much more comfortable. So its policy is made by people who work for corporations. It's made by corporations that make munitions and war material, so they might make tanks or planes or battleships, by peace activists, by educators, doctors, the media. All kinds of people have an influence on what policy gets formed, how it gets formed, but really what policy gets formed, which is what I'm focused on. I'm not concerned on the how, I'm concerned about the what. And some obviously have far more influence than others. If a bunch of people get together under change.org and file a petition saying, please stop using, weapon X, laser blinding weapons, lasers that are used to blind people. The government might look at that for 5 minutes or less at some meeting and say, okay, we have a petition here from, 100,000 voters across the United States. And people are like, where are they mostly? And it's like, says 50,000 of them are in Oregon. They're like, okay, fine. Just put that aside, forget it. And then the next person says, okay, so now we have General so-and-so who used to work for the military is now Mr. So-and-so who runs Grumman or Raytheon. What do you have for us, Bill? And Bill says, well, we want to mount these lasers on our aircraft. And they're like, okay, that sounds reasonable. I mean, you're not going to point them at people, are you? They're like, no, we wouldn't do that. That's against the rules. Okay. So the personal politics of each of these groups is obviously going to have a huge impact on the policies that are chosen. If they let me sit down at the table, things are going to look a little different than if Buddy Boy from U of T, Jordan, what's his face, sits down and says, well, this is the way we're going to do the policy. It's like, well, there are going to be some significant changes or differences between the two of us if my own politics are going to inform how I choose and his politics are going to inform how he chooses. And if neither of us is in the room because we're both boys and a woman is in the room instead, then that's going to be a very different set of politics. Okay, fair enough. So are the people who are making these policies generally to the right? Do they feel that less government is better? That people should be free to act? This is going to determine what kinds of weapons get used. So how do they interpret the idea of a just war? Because what is a proportionate response? Somebody might say, well, look, we're not just going to, they hit us with a hammer, we hit them back with two hammers. It's like, we want them never to hit us again. So get out the chainsaw. You're like, whoa, this is a hammer fight. And like, yeah, well, we want to have some deterrence here. We want to make sure that nobody ever comes after us. We don't want the next person to be hitting us with a hammer either. What if the next person comes after us with a chainsaw, and so on? Is it a just war, for instance? Is it if you're religious, and what kind of religion is it, and so on? When we look at the politics that were formed during Vietnam, they were largely made by men who were white, who had wealth. They didn't have the kind of wealth, the insane amounts of wealth that people have now, where the super wealthy, the super rich, as they came to be called in the late 60s and early 70s. Now, I mean, there really are, trillionaires. It's like, oh, well, there's one, as far as I know. As far as I know, at the moment, the only trillionaire on the planet is actually Jeff Bezos. So, but they are wealthy. They may be in government and have power, or in the military, or both. And they may have been in both, as with Eisenhower, who was the top general, and then moved over to be the president. So you can imagine, if he wants to get something done and he wants the military on board, that he's got lots of friends he can call up and say, hey, General Bradley, hey, Omar, I'd like to get this through the Joint Chiefs. And Omar says, okay, Ike, we can do that. These men were influenced by elite prep Ivy League educations. They were generally Puritan or Protestant, of various different degrees, including Nixon, who was a Quaker. Believe it or not, remember the Quakers, one of the fundamental things about Quakers is they're pacifists. So much for that. Outwardly, at least, they were Christian. They were apparently straight. It was a very dangerous time to be LGBTQ plus, and they believed in the American way of war. It was considered to be communist, to suggest that you would be easy on the enemy or that you would negotiate. I mean, these were things that you didn't do if you were a true patriot, basically. And this carried over to the weapons they chose in the war. And so when Kennedy was pushed on the use of napalm, David Halberstam, in his book, The Best and the Brightest, which I think I recommended, records basically what happened, that Kennedy agreed, but he said only grudgingly, because the weapons were so ugly. He knew what napalm was like, and he was like, can we not use that? And they were like, I'm afraid, Mr. President, we have to use it. So he's like, oh, okay, well, all right. So he signed off on it. It's like, well, he still signed off on it. Grudgingly or not, people still got burned to death, right? So it's not as though they got burned ironically. This is what Halberstam says, but then he loved Kennedy. So the record is skewed, right? It's like, did Kennedy say that? Or did he say, okay, just use it. Use what you have to use and don't bring it back to me. So there are two classes of weapons, which I'm now going to talk about. And so I'm going to break this so you can take a break.